Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Presenting Our Presence. It's our monthly podcast at the University of Alberta. And we're here today with Grant Bruno, and we're going to learn more about Grant's work and his passions. And I am running solo today, so it's just Grant and I for today's episode. And I'm really excited to have this conversation, Grant. So I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself and just start to discuss a little about your research and your passions and how you ended up here at the U of A.
Yeah, Tansei, Grant Bruno Nisigasen, Nipsikopak, Ochinia. Hello, everybody. My name is Grant Bruno. I'm a registered member of Samson Cree Nation, one of the reserves that makes up Musqueam's Alberta here on Treaty 6 territory. I'm a father. I'm also a newly appointed assistant professor in pediatrics here at the U of A as well. And so that's where my research really, I think, is right now, is really in the realm or the space of child and youth health, specific to my home community, Musqueam, and just thinking about just how I'm able to now take university resources and start to apply them in community. One thing that I find when it comes to the really community-driven work is that if you're able to do it right, it's going to have, I think, much more impact, which is, I think, really is what research should be striving to do. But also, when the community feels like it owns the research, there's something there that happens that allows for almost like a more self-determination. And within that self-determination, you're able to really capture what the community wants and needs when it comes to research. And so that's basically the overarching approach that I try and use when doing my work.
That's really amazing. So you're talking, you got into this research here. What was your journey to get to this place where you're an assistant professor and you're working in research in pediatrics? Can you just explain to us a little bit about your journey and arriving at this place where you're able to do this amazing work?
Yeah, for sure. So me becoming faculty was never a part of my plan anyways, as a human. But I always tell people, while I wasn't planning it, I was being guided towards it. And so there's always been these kind of pivotal shifts within my life that have allowed me to embrace exactly what's happening at that moment. And I would say that the most important thing and my most important role is me being a dad. And I remember I was in my early 20s, wasn't doing much with my life. I was working at a dead-end job, really wasn't even thinking about university. I was thinking actually maybe I'll go work in the oil patch so I could just go make money, right? Because this is in the early 2000s and we had the oil boom. And then my then partner told me that she was pregnant. And I had to make a decision between making money for the family and being away for weeks at a time, working up north, or I could start university and not make any money and but be there more in person for my children. And I remember thinking to myself, if I really hold the value of wanting to be a good dad and wanting to be involved and wanting to be connected to my children, my decision has to reflect that. And so I decided to enroll into Red Deer College, actually, because I'm actually didn't finish high school. So I had to go do a bunch of upgrading and all these different things because I feel like my high school, my junior high, and even my elementary experience was very much, I was often reminded that, I'm just a res kid, right? You're not good at math, you're not good at science, and all these different limiting beliefs that were put on me became my beliefs. And so I still remember thinking to myself when I first started university I don't know if I'm going to be even good at this. I've always kind of struggled with my marks over the years. But I realized within that first year, I was fully applying myself, right? I was studying, I was doing the extra readings, I was going to every class, and I was taking it very seriously because all of a sudden I had motivation that went beyond me. I had children that I was wanting to support now. And I remember after that first year, I was doing really good, and my GPA was great. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I think I can do a master's, and I'd never even explored that before. And so over my undergrad, that was my goal. And so again, taking my studies very seriously, and it wasn't perfect by any means. There's still a lot of trauma that I was still trying to unpack. A lot of things like my mom went to residential school, right, as did my grandmothers. And so through all these different experiences, I was just, some days I was just barely getting by. Some days I felt really great. But I knew that if I just applied myself and I was willing to go and explore different things, that these opportunities would start to find me. And so in my final year of my undergrad, I was connected with the Enrich program, which was a pregnancy-related or pregnancy-focused program. And so they were looking to hire research assistants in Muskogee because they had a project there. And again, this is my first real experience in the world of research. And so they hired me, and they wanted me to start up a program, not a program, but a research study with men in the community and looking at our roles during pregnancy. And so what I did was, and again, this is just my undergrad, I'm not in grad school yet. I went and interviewed men in the community who were identified as doing a good job. And I still remember thinking to myself while I was doing these interviews of how healing that was for me. And me being able to connect with other men away from, that really superficial small talk of like weather and sports, of engaging with men in such a way where we're able to really connect and talk about our roles as fathers, gave me a sense of connection and belonging within the community that I had never felt before. And on top of this, because the research that was happening was all being guided by elders, I had a new connection to a group of elders as well who were supporting me and teaching me and gifting me their knowledge. And so what I've realized is that over my research years, from my undergrad into my master's and even into my PhD and now as a professor, I think at the core of it is really about healing. Healing me, but also taking the healings and the teachings that I've been able to apply to my own life and gift those teachings to other people. And so for my master's, I developed a cultural intervention for healthcare providers. And so we brought healthcare providers from outside and inside the community to a series of events, right? We did ceremony with them, brought them to a powwow. And again, it was at the center of it, I think it was healing. And then after my master's was when my second son was diagnosed as on the autism spectrum. And I didn't really have a real plan to do a PhD. I was open to it. And as soon as he was diagnosed, I went to go read literature on it. And I quickly realized that there's very little academic literature on the experiences of autism within First Nations communities right across Canada. And so, of course, the first thing I do is okay, well, this to me seems like something I can learn from. And I can go and become a better dad. And so I connected with my supervisor, my PhD supervisor, Dr. Lonnie Zwangelbaum, who's a developmental pediatrician and the director of the Autism Research Center at the Glenrose Hospital. And I still remember sitting down with them, and I'm very apprehensive when it comes to meeting new people because I don't know where you're coming from. I don't know if you have any discriminatory beliefs about me or anything like that. But I sat down with him, and I knew as soon as he started talking, we started connecting, that he was going to be my supervisor. I just had this feeling that I knew that if I just was able to teach me about autism, but me be able to bring in that First Nations experience as a dad, I was going to be able to do something really good in the community. And so that's what happened. Again, rooted back into healing. And so my PhD research was on autism in First Nations communities. And so this led me to becoming, I feel like, one of the first people within Canada to do this research. And I think that the Department of Pediatrics took notice. So me being a PhD student in pediatrics, what they were seeing was me being able to really develop a community-driven research project. Not in full independence, of course, because I still had all these different institutional barriers getting in the way of that. But because there's very little people who have experience in the field or in the space of medicine with community, I essentially just developed my own community-based project, from developing like a community advisory circle to developing my own kind of methods and then really making sure that when it was becoming, when I started to really think about what I was learning, there's a new field that's called implementation science. And so I was taking the learnings from the elders and from the caregivers and from the community, and I was starting to apply them in community. And so one of the examples I love using is we established, or we started a sensory TP. And so we set up a sensory TP now at the two local PAOs, Ermineskin and Sampson, every year. And so so myself and we partnered with the first one with Autism Edmonton, is we were able to take, again, the knowledge and the teachings from the community, and we applied it to this space. And so what it does is it allows families to show up to a PAO, which can be very overwhelming, and come to this space within the TP and regulate their children. It's, a judgment-free zone and so on and so forth. But the other thing it does is it addresses stigma in the community, because autism has a lot of stigma, so that surrounds it. And it allows families to come in and connect with us and ask us questions and say, I'm really struggling with my child. I don't know if they're autistic or not. What do I do? Or a family came up to us and was like, my child is autistic, but I can't get resources. Can you connect me? And so again, there's that element of healing of like, okay, I've been through this process myself. I can connect with you. And so my healing can become your healing.
I like that. My healing can become your healing. There's this sense of that the people that you work with become, like you said, you have a hard time getting to know people or letting people in, but you have that immediate barrier is removed once you know that you share that experience with them, right? Of having either like wondering if your child has autism, or knowing that your child is autistic and wondering what to go from there, how to go from there. And it made me wonder, like, when you help these families and you kind of, they're part of this process and these programs that you're starting, what does that relationship look like then with the families as you continue in your work and the community support?
So a lot of the work that I do is rooted back into Wiktoktowin, right? Or I would even say Mio Wiktoktowin, right? So good relations, and understanding that there's a relationality and an interconnectedness of all living things within the universe. And so I've realized over the years, when I first started getting into research, one of the first books that you, of course, read is Decolonizing Methodologies by Linda Twai Smith. And in it, she talks about how research is a dirty word. It's extractive. It's this thing that has caused a lot of harm in our communities. And I recognize that right away. And it's still very much this way in a lot of spaces. And I, because of the values that I hold as a Nehiao Napeo, as a Cree man, I make sure that the research I'm doing and how I do that research through the process, as well as even sharing the research, is rooted back into Mio Wiktoktowin of keeping and making sure you're maintaining good relations, because I'm accountable now too, right? So I'm accountable for the community that I'm working with, and my home community of Muskogees. I'm accountable to the families who are gifting me their knowledge. I'm accountable to the elders. I'm accountable to all these different dynamics that are happening in the community. I would say so even more so that I'm accountable to the university, because at some point I can leave the university and that's it, and I could go work somewhere else. But that community is always going to be my community, no matter what. And I have to make sure that whatever I do is making sure that I'm not causing any harm. I'm not being extractive. I'm not prioritizing my publications or what I need out of it. And I'm centering the community's wants and needs. And so I take a very relational approach. So even with participants, right? So like if I'm doing interviews with people in the community, I make sure that I'm bringing balance to that interview. And so what I've seen in a lot of qualitative work is that people will come in and they have their interview guide and they read strictly from that. It's like they asked a question, there's a response, and it's just so on and so forth. It just feels very like when you add too much structure to something and it becomes less human. And so even for myself, again, taking that relational approach, is I would have my interview guide for sure with me. But I realized, and I know this just because I've worked in the community for so long, is that participants really appreciate when you're connecting with them on a human to human level. And so there was times where things would get really, sometimes the conversation would get really like heavy at times. And again, I would just offer my support, and I would just let them, I would validate what they're saying. So, what you're going through is very challenging. But then I would also make them feel less isolated by saying things like, I felt that way before. I felt like, I still remember when my son was diagnosed, and just leaving the clinic, and you're experiencing all these different emotions, right? Fear and a little bit of anger and disappointment. And it's just a whirlwind of pretty much everything. And me having gone through that process, I understand what these families are going through at any particular moment. And so I just offer them, of course, words of encouragement. Sometimes the conversation will completely go somewhere else that isn't directly related to my research, but I'm okay with that. Because again, what you want to do is make sure that the participants are leaving these interactions with me feeling like they can actually do the things that they need to do for their families. And so that's my main thing in life, is like making sure that I'm acting as a sounding board to them at times. Sometimes it does feel therapeutic, which I think is a good thing. Again, going back to healing. And then also gifting my own knowledge to them. So I'd connect them with resources afterwards, or I'd follow up, right? It wasn't just like a one-off thing where it's like, okay, you're done. Maybe I'll see you in passing. It's like, no, I'm going to reach out back to you and see how you're doing. Here's my email if you want, or even my cell phone. If you want to call or text me, I can support you. And so because the work that I do, it sometimes it does feel like social work, but that's what the community needs. And that's exactly what I'm going to keep doing. Is I can't just do research, because that makes me, if I were to just do research, makes me a part of the problem. But if I can do the research and then support these families where they need to be supported, it makes me a part of the solution.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to say it, is that, like you said, a lot of historically research has been very extractive. And that's one of the things that I've heard from other people who do research with community, work alongside community, is that you have to develop relationships. You have to make it feel that there's give and take, that this is not just a one-off. This is not just about, I need to write this paper, so you need to give me the information. And keeping those connections later on, right, is a huge part of in general, I think, how we stay connected to our communities, and how we continue to help our communities heal. And I think that's like really like beautiful to hear, because this is like, and this is like nearby. Like, this is not, this is happening like just down the road. Like, Massachusetts is not far, and it just makes me think of like other communities who could probably like that do this, like would love to see this kind of work in their own space, or how it can be translated to other, like, are there any other people that you know of doing your work here, or like what kind of programs do we have at the U of A that kind of do this stuff as well?
So I think there's good work happening all across the university. Again, I think that being in the Faculty of Medicine Dentistry, though, I do feel isolated at times. And you got to understand, like, I'm one of 2 First Nations faculty in pediatrics in all of Canada. And so I've been, again, which is really big responsibility, and it's, again, really exciting, but at the same time, there's times where I feel like I'm going up against this huge mountain, basically. And I'm sure other people have felt like this in other spaces, but I think it's emphasized, or it's a bit more within this space, because a lot of people, again, I think but at the same time, I would say that there is a shift that's happening within our institutions, where people are becoming more open-minded to how we do things, right? And I think that the way that the systems are built, again, makes a lot of the work that I do challenging. So I would say, like, the way that ethics works, right? It's very much rooted back into biomedical research, whereas the research I do is community. And so what you're trying to do is fit this type of system, this way of thinking into a community that doesn't need that kind of thinking. We don't need a hypothesis. What we need is support, right? We don't need another experiment. What we need is clean drinking water. And so I think that as long as I just keep working and I just keep allowing myself to be able to understand, again, going back to the community for everything pretty much, and keeping myself grounded within that. And I would say that even within that, I work quite closely with the Women and Children's Health Research Institute. And so I'm really grateful for their whole team. Because again, when it comes to this type of work, especially in the realm of Indigenous health research, there's not a lot happening here at the university, but it is shifting, and we're slowly going towards getting more capacity and people doing this kind of work. But I think more importantly, we need people who don't come from our communities to understand that the way we do things and how we do research is fundamentally going to be different. It's not anything better or worse or so on and so forth. It's just different. That's okay. And so working with WICRI, they're very open to this, and they've supported me now. And so I'm taking a different approach to all of it, right? So like I do a lot of ceremony, and they're like, okay, let's do it. I'm like, okay, we need to get elders involved. And so we're actually hiring an elder to work directly with me because, again, as a man within this space of children and youth health, I'm not a woman. I don't understand that women experience. But what I can do is bring on an elder who can support me and guide me and make sure that I'm not, allowing my biases as a man to get in the way of doing really good work. And so we're going to be hiring like an elder just to work with me. And they're open to this, right? They're open to understanding that our elders very much are our PhDs, and they should be guiding all the work, and all of our work should be rooted back into ceremony. And if we do that, the results of our work are going to have, I think, better impact.
I think when we met previously, you mentioned a program within WICRI that you were working on, and can you tell us a bit more about that? I'm going to butcher the Cree name if I try to say it, so I'll let you say it for me.
Yeah, so I've been in conversation now with WICRI for a few years, and they've really been supporting me through becoming a professor, as well as giving me really a research package to start the work that I do. But I knew before I started any of the research, I had to go and do ceremony for it, and so we went and did a pipe ceremony, and we were gifted the name for this program. It's called Ispimihk Awâsisak, and so that translates as Sky Children. And so Sky Children, again, it's rooted into Musqueambish, but what we're going to do is explore what this might look like within Treaty 6. And it's really aimed at supporting First Nations children in community through research, really. And I think, again, when we go back to the support I'm getting through WICRI and how we do things differently, there's this idea within these research funding is like you have to have every step planned out. And so what the WICRI funding and their support has done is allowed me to be really flexible and say, I don't have the whole research plan. I know I don't want to do research in children and youth health, but the specifics of how we're going to get there the community hasn't told me yet. And so there's quite a bit of funding built into just community engagement to figure out what the community wants. And so we're flipping it, right? Because I'm currently going through this CHR proposal, and they want all those little details without me actually knowing the details or being able to, do the community engagements to get to those details. And so it's really flexible, and that's another key piece to all of this, is that flexibility of allowing me to come up with a research idea, engage with the community, allow the community to build that idea and co-develop that idea with me as of course a community member, and then also bring the research lens to all of it, right? And so I think it's really important to understand that Ispimihk Awâsisak, again, is rooted back into ceremony. And it's one thing that I've learned over the years is when you take something to ceremony, you might not, the trajectory of what you're asking for might not look like something that makes sense to you, but by the end of it, it'll make perfect sense, right? And so I don't know what this is going to look like quite yet, but I am confident that the work that I'm doing within community is going to have impact for families.
Yeah. And I think that fundamental shift of how you're working that's to me groundbreaking. That's not how things are usually done, right? Like you're saying, this other program that you're starting up is, yeah, very step by step, fill in the details, tell us everything. And I think that fundamental shift in, well, I want to do this and I need my community to give me more information or instruction or advice on how it's going to look. That is I don't think I've ever heard of that before. And so I think that is really special. And I hope that that's something that we can continue to build across the university in other areas. And I think maybe it's especially uh, surprising or like inspiring to me because it's in pediatrics, because it's in like a science, medicine kind of area in general. Um, but it's taking this very sociological approach to like, this is a community driven activity. And the respect that you have for that community is, I think, very, very evident. So I think that's amazing that you get to have these experiences and that you get to contribute back to your community. And that's also a really great part of healing, right? Is that they are, I'm sure, 100% proud of you and excited to help you on your journey. Uh,
Yeah, so the Indigenous Caregiving Collective is really a response to something that I'm seeing very often in the community. And it's that I think caregiving is often under acknowledged and underappreciated, and it's happening in all different spaces within the community, right? So the examples I love using, of course, are the first one that usually comes to mind is children in care. So this could be children who have been apprehended or trying to keep them in the community, and so they go through something called kinship care, but also kinship around caring for children with disabilities or loved ones with disabilities. This could be care around caring for sick or ill loved ones. And from my experience and from what I've seen in the community is that caregiving happens quite often. And what I would love to see is a more unified approach or voice to caregivers and allow them to really advocate for their own needs and wants. Caregiving is often a thankless and underappreciated role. And as somebody who provides care for my children, I don't really see myself as like a caregiver, so to speak. I'm just doing what most parents are going to do, and that's provide for their families, right? And unfortunately, what we need to do is start to really think about our roles within caregiving, within the community, as more than just a family member, especially when you're going above and beyond, which happens way too often. And so I wanted to start the Indigenous Caregiving Collective, which is being funded through the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence and supported by them. And I wanted to be able to do a research project that explored our understandings of caregiving. This could be cultural understandings. It could be current or contemporary understandings of what's actually happening in our communities. But it also could be around developing a care network across Canada. And so really trying to connect caregivers with each other, with resources, with different types of supports, because I'm learning more and more about the role of caregivers and how overwhelmed we can get. There's a lot of burnout. There's a lot of people who just are at their wits' end, I find. And so if I can just have that opportunity to learn from them a little bit and do the research with them, and then we could take those research findings and start to apply different programming and policies and different types of supports in community that address what these caregivers are really going through. And so it's a 3-year project. I'm in the very beginning of it, which is really exciting. We're currently hiring a care navigator. And so this care navigator is actually going to work in the new Musqueam Pediatric Clinic, and they're actually going to support caregivers as they come in. And they're actually going to be able to connect with caregivers as they leave, and that's important. I still remember when my sons were diagnosed. I remember that walk in between the assessment clinic and my vehicle. And I also remember thinking to myself, what do I do now? What is my next step? How do I make sure that my children are being supported? And I was left really to my own kind of devices and experience, which I didn't have any at all. And so this care navigator, what we're going to do is actually reach back out to these families to make sure, do you need anything? And so then that will allow the people who come into the clinic, who have questions, who maybe want to get connected with a resource, maybe they just want to talk to somebody, maybe they are trying to figure out, what does this diagnosis actually mean for me and my family? This caregiver can help them navigate the system. They can help them advocate on behalf of their children. And it's really just an extra layer of support that I find is often missing from many clinics. And so it's really trying to take a very family-centered approach and doing follow-up care as well. We're also going to be developing some workshops, some training for caregivers in the community. These workshops can be around systems navigation, advocacy, self-care, connecting with resources, all those little things that I think a lot of people take for granted. We can't in our community because, unfortunately, because of colonialism, we're in survival mode. And so if we can have somebody who's dedicated to supporting these families in those small little areas, and even something as simple as documentation, right? So you get handed when you leave the assessment, this document, it's usually paper, and they expect you to keep it for the rest of your life. And you need that to go get services and supports. What we want to do is ask that the parent or the guardian or whoever, ask them for some of those forms so we can keep them on their behalf, right? And so they can have somebody that they can lean on and rely on if they need to go get a new contract with the government, or they need to go apply for Jordan's Principle. And so just little things like that just provide these caregivers just a little bit of extra support, doing research around it, learning from them, learning about cultural understandings of caregiving. I was taught by an elder that caregiving in our communities is what's known as a sacred responsibility. And so that sacred responsibility is something that we take very seriously. But how do we start to put that into policies, right? And how do we start to advocate on behalf of caregivers in that sacred responsibility?
Yeah, that's amazing. I think you're right. This is not, it's a thankless job, caregiving, for the most part. So to have this opportunity for caregivers to connect with each other, to have support, it's going to mean so much to the health and growth of their children, because they are stronger. They are a stronger support as their child grows. So
Yeah.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah. So this is just generally for most Canadians. There's some really good stats around this that says 1 in 4 Canadians are going to be a caregiver at some point in their lives. I would argue that in my community, Musqueam, that's closer to 100%. I've seen in the community, like aunts and uncles, when they move in and they've lost their job and you have to take care of them. I've seen Gookums taking care of their grandchildren, right? I've seen even myself. So I grew up in a foster home, not as a foster child, but as my mom took in foster children quite frequently and provided care for them, right? And so I think that we need to start building awareness in this space, because one thing that the system doesn't understand is how much we, as I think Indigenous peoples, really contribute to the economy, and how much our caregiving and how much we actually provide for hours and energy and resources actually saves the wider economy a lot more money. Because there's another stat that says for every hour of healthcare somebody receives, caregivers provide an extra 5 hours on top of that. And that to me shows that the things that the care that we provide should be seen as an economic almost resource, and we should be able to have a unified voice to make sure that we're advocating for caregivers in our communities.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And you said you're just starting with this, you're just hiring your care navigator. And I was just wondering, is there anything else about this program that you'd like to share as we close out our time together?
Yeah, no, just to keep an eye out for the work that I'm doing. So, Indigenous Caregiving Collective. If you know a caregiver, you know somebody to connect with, one of the first things we're going to do is build out a platform for caregivers. And so that'll be rolled out next year sometime. And then we'll do some social media campaigns. And to make sure that, again, caregivers feel like they're being represented in a way that aligns with who we are, I think, as Indigenous people.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Grant. I just want to thank you again for this time together, for this extra time together as well. I really appreciate it. I think this is really important work, and I really look forward to seeing how things progress for you. And I'll just leave it to you if there's any last words you'd like to share.
No, I want to thank you for the opportunity to come and share a little bit about who I am, my experiences, my knowledge. Again, I'm still learning as much as I can, but it's always a good opportunity to take what I've learned and share that with people in a way that, makes sense to me. So thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Grant. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Grant's episode. And we'll see you next time. Bye.